Okay, so I haven't prepared anything preemptively for what we're going to do here. So we're just going to all be taking this as we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is open my image, right, and make sure that my image size is to my preferred resolution, 300. Here we go. Now, because I did a fast rendering, mine's going to be lower resolution than yours. Yours should be high resolution to begin with. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into my resources, first my renders, and I'm going to, everything that isn't already in there, I'm going to drag into my window. I'm just going to enter, 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 enter. And all of these, some of these will be using to help us model and move things around. Some of these will be shown in the image, and some of these won't. So we're just going to keep this up front for the time being. I'm going to create a mask that helps me only show the white parts of this images. So what I've done is I've used my magic wand tool, and I'm selecting all of the black around here. Right-clicking, select inverse. Now I only have what wasn't selected, and I'm going to create a mask. So now the only thing you're seeing is this object around here, and what I want actually is for this image to be the only thing that you see. So I want to look at my render ID, select everything. My tolerance is too high. I need like a 50. Okay, that's about right. I'm going to add to my selection here. I use a lot of masks in Photoshop because it allows you to go back and change your resources without damaging the source file, source images that you put in here. So I will be using a lot of masks, and that's kind of a pro tip, I think, if I could give you a single one for the semester, is to use a lot of masks in Photoshop and in Illustrator, but especially in Photoshop. I think it's a really valuable way to model. So I've got what I want selected. I'm going to turn off that layer, and now I'm looking at my block, and I want only the block to be shown, which is where I'm going to create a mask. Okay, I'll turn off my under layers just to showcase this. It looks like it has a little bit of edge detail problems. I'm going to ignore those for now because I'm going to import my line work, so you probably won't notice that. So let's do that. I'm going to place embedded, import my line work. I had it all on one file, so I have to scale the entire thing this way. It's about the size that I want it. It's about where I want it. It's a little big. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. I'm going to create another mask. This time, using my rectangular marquee, I'm just going to select what I want in the mask. Create mask, make sure I'm hovering over my blocks layer. And now you only see the line work for that. And immediately the weird outside stuff disappeared. So now we have everything selected. Let's show you how to use our shadow. So I'm going to put the shadow on top of the other thing, and I'm going to run an invert on that, right? So now what you see is this, and I'm going to multiply that. Oh, not my invert. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm going to multiply. And so before, where the shadows had disappeared, for the most part, now we get these extra shadows. I think that looks pretty nice. If it was the only thing on the page, it would work just as well as anything else. So these will be on top of our additional textures. So I'm just going to put them all in a folder and call them renders. I'm going to start a new folder and call these textures. Most of you have already done things like this, so I'm not going to spend too much time doing it, but I will show you a couple of little tricks on how to add texture to a document. You'll notice some of these images are repeat. I'm going to throw some brick in here. Sure. Oh, because we're underneath the renders, you won't get to see them until we turn the render folder to multiply. And you'll notice there's already a shade on top of all of our textures now, because the renders are on top of the textures and because they're set to multiply. You could toggle around with this. I think multiply might work. Overlay might do something interesting. Yeah, I think those are your big ones. Darken might do something interesting. But just toggle these and see if there's something you like. If it goes along with your style or not, it's totally up to you. So I'm back to my brick textures. The first thing I'm going to do is free transform, Control T or Command T, and I want to distort. And I'm going to set this to about my 30 degrees. There it is, 30. Back into scale. And I'm just going to apply this to this corner face over here. Again, using a mask. Now you can clip this if you want, using the lasso tool, but I like using the mask because I get to then recopy this texture and put it wherever I want. So to show that, I'm going to get into my renders, turn on this block render, and select. Again, to illustrate, I'm using the magic wand and I'm selecting my render ID material here. It's a little sloppy. Maybe I'll turn the tolerance up a little bit to like 35. Okay, that's a little cleaner. Here's another little tool you might want to use, Feather. I doubt you'll get the opportunity to use this, but what it does is it kind of smooths the edge of some pixelated selections. Turn this back off. Make sure I'm selecting my brick texture, create a mask, and so as you can see, the mask isn't perfect, but since it is a mask, I can clean this up pretty easily. So I'm just going to illustrate that. To select my imperfect edges, and the best thing about a mask is I can edit the mask, right? That's not how I want to do that. I believe, is it control? It's not control. Sorry, control is not what I wanted to do. It's Alt. When you hold Alt and select your mask, it will take you to an image that is only the mask. And so you'll see that the white part of the mask is what you see and the black part is what you don't. So you can go with your brush tool and use a black swatch and clean that up. Now we have a crisp edge, and when we get out of that, we're crisp here. Now you can do that without looking at the mask, as long as you remember which color is which. And so now we know we need to clean this edge up, and I have my mask selected. You can select the whole layer, or the object in the layer, and then the mask within the layer. And in this case, I have the mask within the layer selected. I'm going to make sure white is selected, and then going to clean that up. So that's one way to use masks that doesn't break an object. I wonder if this is the edge of my texture, or if my selection tool just missed it. It looks like the selection tool just missed it. So here's another way I can approach this. So I need to move the whole texture up without moving the mask. You'll see this little linkage here between the layer and its mask. If I click that, then I can select my layer. What that does, is if I move this, it moves the mask with it. But if I click that off, the mask will stay in its spot, and I can move my texture up. And you'll notice that the texture slides and the mask stays. So I can do really easy fixes to dumb mistakes. So that's one easy way to apply a texture. I'm going to now show you, most of you already know how to do things like that, but I'll show you now how to add your entourage. So on top of my rendered layer, I'm going to make another folder, entourage, and I'm going to start adding objects to that entourage. I have a folder of resources available. Most of these are PNGs. We will start with a couple people. A fun old lady for starts. Make sure it's in our entourage folder. This clearly isn't a PNG. Sometimes your filter can fix that. And I think for our purposes, that's fine, but you might just want to stick to PNGs as you move forward. So I think my other images are PNGs. Some dude walking. Yeah, this one's a PNG. Someone reading. Play with the scale of these people. You can definitely add a ton of people, or you can add one person who's massive interacting with, you know, a smaller object, or a lot of little people where this thing is a skyscraper, or, and I'm just going with, I think, is a pretty generic scale where it's like a 2-story building or like a big sculpture. But play around with this. Last person. This one's massive. That's a trick. If you hold Alt, it will scale an object from its center rather than from wherever you are scaling it from. I like that for keeping things centered. I think it's pretty nice. Okay, easy enough. And let's get some texture in here. So right underneath my render, I suppose this is part of a texture. So those are my lines. That's my invert. That's my shadow layer. Which I'm going to turn off for the time being. There it is. Okay, so underneath I have that circle that we made before. And you can only barely see it because I did the clipping a little wrong, but because we can see it, we'll use that to add a texture. So what I'm going to do from here is add some grass. And I have a number of different ways to do this, but I'm just going to go with a lawn to begin with. Something really simple. I'm trying to use images that aren't totally in perspective, which obviously most of the images you'll find will be pretty much in perspective. But if you get something that looks down rather than more forward, that's a good candidate. You probably won't notice the difference in perspective from the foreground to the background in such a limited span. So I am going to select around my object, and then I'm going to clip out our block. What I'm doing here is I'm selecting my circle path to create this clipping mask. And this is actually essential for this technique, so consider using it that way. And I did that in reverse, didn't I? I subtracted instead of added. And it depends on how you go about selecting things. Generally, I select objects and then invert selection because it's easier to select them in the first place. But you can go about that any way you want. Okay, so now I only have what I want to be textured as grass underneath, so I'm going to apply that mask. Okay, clearly I did that wrong. Again, I forgot to select inverse. Now I only have this circle selected, so create mask. And this is pretty good to begin with. I mean, it's just this circle of grass. It doesn't have to be much more than that, but what you might want to do is fade it out. And you can do this, again, using your mask. I'll showcase how to do that in a little bit. First, I'm going to make sure that I'm not selecting any of my box. So in doing that, I'm just going to select the outside of all this stuff. Because what I'm about to do is apply a brush to this shape that I've created and the texture thereon. Okay, so I have my brush, and what I want to do is I want to fade this white line into this black. So I'm going to touch my brush. You can, your brackets next to the P icon on your keyboard, the right bracket and the left bracket scale your brush, which is a pretty neat tool. I actually just found that out not long ago. And I've got my brush onto a hardness of 0 and a size of about, I don't know, 70, 80. And I'm just going to run along the edge of this. It takes a steady hand. I click off every now and then because if you mess up, you can always go back in your history to redo it. Like now I'm going to click off. Okay, I've gone all the way around and softened that up a bit, and I'm going to get out of my view here. And now it's a soft. Now it's a soft view of that circle. And you can soften it up even further by, say, increasing your brush stroke scale. If we really want it to be a really soft edge, we can super soften this thing up. But for our purposes, I'm just going to show this. And you can apply this texture to just about anything. I'm going to add, or you can apply this mask to just about anything. I'm going to add mask to selection, create a folder, call it ground, and apply that mask again. So now anything I throw into this folder is going to have this mask. So say you change your mind about the grass, and you don't want the grass anymore. Well, let's say you want a beach. I just throw the beach in, make sure it's in that folder, and it follows that mask. That's why masks are such an important tool in Photoshop, is because you can, and folders, utilizing folders and masks can get you just about anything really quick with only a little bit of homework. So, touch up and do some of these things. Maybe, when you have that in, go back up into your Entourage and add a couple of trees. You know how this stuff goes. If I want this tree to be behind this other layer without having to clip it out, sometimes I'll just drag it and make sure it's in, textures. Or, come to think of it, that isn't working because we're using multiply on other things. So maybe you do have to, apply I think you can have an entourage that's on top of everything, and then in between that, you might create a new folder that's like background, and you want to cut, let's say you want to cut that block out. So I'm just going to apply mask to selection. Right, so now I have everything outside of that block selected, and I'm going to apply that mask to my background and put my tree in that background. And now anything that I throw into this folder will be in the background, and I won't have to clip it. Now everything in that is going to be behind our object. And you may have to go in and, you know, trim up the inconsistencies in your mask, right? So like, it pretty much took the wrong mask that I wanted, or not nearly what I wanted, and so now I've got to clean it up. But this is still a much faster way to go about including Entourage, just throwing these things in. And I think I only did this in, looks like 20 minutes to me. So give it a try, use a lot of masks, throw these things in, and you'll be ready to go by Thursday. Okay, so I'll see you all then.